You know the number one thing your teammates and team members need from you?
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Thoughtful Talent Show. I'm Jen Werner of Jen Werner Coaching.
And I'm Chad Ahern of Talent Teams Consulting.
Today, we're going to be talking about trust. And on that, Chad, do you want to share with us why this is so important and why it's the number one thing people need from us?
Yeah, so I think there are two big stats that really stand out. The first one is that um, employee trust in organizational leadership is kind of not at an all-time low, but it is heading back that way, and that's really not good. So based on the data Gallup has put together, the low was in June of 2011 when they first started tracking this. It was at 17% of employees strongly agreed with the statement, "I trust the leadership of my organization." The high, interestingly, was just before the pandemic. In May of 2019, we got up to 24%. Based on the most current data I could find that Gallup has available, right now we're at around 21%. So about only about one in five employees strongly agree that they trust their organization's leadership. So it gives you a sense of how important trust is. The other interesting piece is around employee engagement. So you and I are big champions of making sure everybody's engaged and excited about their work. In high trust environments, 1 in 2 people are engaged. In low trust teams, 1 in 12 are engaged. So if you've got a team of 10 or 12, maybe one person is bringing their full potential to your work. That's concerning. So this is one of the reasons why we wanted to focus on trust, that it is one of the more foundational elements of leadership and of getting things done. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. I know you have some really passionate reasons about why this is really important for you. I approach it from the numbers. Your belief, I know, has some real strong feelings about this. So what are your thoughts on why trust is so important?
Well, Chad, those stats are staggering and actually really scary. I'm like, if only 1 in 12 people are trusting, or are engaged, then we know that trust is low. And to get trust, we need authentic, honest, and even vulnerable communication. Without it, we work alone. We're unclear on the motivation of others, which I think is really scary. That's where that trust in leadership comes from. We spend an enormous amount of time either covering our own butts or we're looking, searching for others' mistakes. We can be defensive, critical, argumentative, and often withholding. None of these behaviors are things that lead to high-performing teams or engaged employees.
I mean, just thinking about all those behaviors, they're all solo focused. They're all, let's keep my circle as small as humanly possible and don't engage with anybody else.
Absolutely.
That is not teamwork at all.
No,
So,
definitely not.
Yeah, a really interesting thread there.
Go
So,
ahead.
no, it's I was just thinking about, sort of, on that relationship piece. You shared with some thoughts with me about kind of what your take is on trust and, you know, building beyond that solo focus or that solo silo. What does that look like, or what should we be thinking about or what do you think we should be talking about when it comes to trust?
It might not be granted immediately, when we're talking about building trust. It's something that doesn't naturally just come out. But sometimes some of us need to see, a track record of behavior. Some of those things, those like behaviors of someone who is trusting, is they look out for one another. When you feel trust, you know that you're looking out for one another. You're open to hearing feedback, good or bad. You're open to that. You're able to offer advice freely and even accept it, and maybe even accept help. For a lot of people without trust, they're not able to accept help. When you do have trust, when you're a trusting person, when you are trusting of the other person, you're able to admit your mistakes and ask for help when you need it. We're watching out for one another, and we're willing to even make personal sacrifices for the team. I think these are some of those like really relational things that come from when you have trust with one another. It really starts with that authentic, clear communication. A lot of times that's pretty vulnerable too, you know, like
Yeah.
it needs to go both ways.
Yeah. I found two things interesting in what you just said, and they're tied into some of the things that I wanted to bring in on this topic is,
Yeah.
well, one place I might actually disagree with you just a smidge, or maybe a different perspective on it, is that I think for some leaders, and you and I have talked about this a lot with our high responsibility, is that we do need to
Mhm.
see that track record, or it can be
Yeah.
hard to extend trust. Some of the research shows, though, is that the best organizations or the best leaders in particular actually extend that trust before they've seen proof
Mm.
of trust from the other.
Mhm.
And it ties in also with your comment about being vulnerable, that
Yeah.
you have to be open enough. And I think that that's part of that bridge that you're building, is that you need to extend the trust first, and then only then, when it starts to be infringed upon or broken,
Yeah.
you then need to kind of take a step back and be like, okay, how do we get back to a trusting relationship? So it's just a
Yeah.
slightly different lens on what you shared. I get it from the other conversations you and I have had around some of our themes, and the coaching we've provided to each other, is that sometimes it does take those of us with responsibility or analytical, that have much more of a "Bring it to me," or "show me that you're going to do the work
Right.
before I trust you." um, we need to take a step back and be like, okay, you need to extend it first. I think the
Yeah.
other thing that you touched. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
What I like about what you just said is it reminds me of some of the things we heard at Gallup about getting feedback or giving feedback. It's even that like um, lead with positive intent, right? So
Yes.
the first thought is, like we're not coming to work to cover our butts and find others' mistakes and work all on our own. Like we're here to do something together. So if we're feeling that now, or if we can extend that even just a little bit farther than what we're used to or comfortable doing, then at least we're leading with that. We expect that others are doing their best too, and not just out to get us. If
Yes.
that's a way I could put that.
Yeah. No, that's great. And it does lead into the other thought that I was going to tie into, that you mentioned, is that vulnerability.
Yeah.
um I'm a huge fan of Patrick Lencioni. So the author, he's written The Five Dysfunctions of a Team and Silos
Yep.
and Politics in the Workplace, and a few other books. And one of the things that he talks about is, the trust also in his model, or the absence of trust, is the very first dysfunction that needs to be addressed. It is the foundational component. Hence why we started with that intro question of what's the most important thing your team members need from you.
Yeah.
That strong trust comes from being vulnerable. So the more that you are open about not only your strengths, which we love to talk about, but also the
Mhm.
places where you are weakest, or where your talents might be getting in your way, that then allows other people to engage with you in a trusting manner, to say, hey, look, I can help you with that, or I can help address this. So I
Right.
think that that's something. There's also something that I came across as we prepped for this, and got my thinking going. There's a book called The Trusted Advisor, and they have a great
Oh.
almost equation, sort of thinking about how you build trusting relationships. And essentially it goes this, and I'm not going to get into the whole book. People can go out and read it, but it goes credibility plus reliability plus intimacy, so the closeness of people,
Yeah.
divided by your self-orientation. So are you me focused, or are you others focused? And that goes to that extension of extending trust to others first.
Hmm.
Um, so I wanted to tie that into what you were saying earlier about extending it to other people and being vulnerable and leading with a positive intent. So
So, in our last episode, we were talking about setting team expectations. And we know that with teams who already have some trust, like they've developed and established that trust, they're able to move a lot quicker. And this gets me thinking about Stephen Covey in his book, The Speed of Trust. Do you want to talk a little more about that, Chad?
Yeah. So I I definitely think that Stephen's work is key to this conversation. So Stephen Covey talks about the four core components of trust: integrity, intent, capabilities, and results. And then he also talks about essentially 13 behaviors
Mm.
that, as he puts in the actually in the right in the table of contents, he says these are ways you can think about working out of the holes that you've worked your way into.
Mm-hmm.
And while we probably won't have time to cover all 13 behaviors in this episode, I think if people have that book or want to look at that book, it's a great resource.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into strengths application here in a second, but it's looking at those behaviors and then thinking about how people can use their strengths, talents, identified talents, to help address some of those behaviors. But I think to go to the four components, I was
Mm-hmm.
actually going to bleed that right into the conversation around strengths, because
Awesome.
um, really those four components are actually divided two and two. So two
Yeah.
of them relate to character, who you are. So that's
Right.
integrity and intent. So integrity is kind of walking the talk, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
doing sort of what you plan on doing. And I think this is where, obviously, most of the town themes, you can think about a way to, how do you demonstrate integrity? How do you walk the walk? The themes that really came to mind for me as we were thinking about building trust and helping leaders, one was belief. I know that that's really strong for you, and you could probably detail that one a bit more. But knowing one's values and then acting according to those values, I think
Yeah.
is really key. So that's one talent theme that could be really helpful in enforcing one's integrity. The other one, we've touched on it already during this episode, is responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Doing things the way we promised other people we said we would do them.
Yeah.
And so that's a way to walk the talk. So those are just two examples. I would encourage our listeners to think about, okay, which talent themes can I lean into um, to help me enhance my integrity?
Yeah.
The
Those are
second
great, Chad.
Yeah, so the second one is intent. So this all has to do with motives, agendas. Do you have an agenda with the actions you're taking? And then also
Mm-hmm.
looking for that mutual benefit. So how does this work for others? And this one I thought across a lot of different themes, but there were five that kind of stuck out. So relator, so creating those close relationships. Think about how you extend trust into your closest network. Includer, because of its focus on involving others.
Yeah.
So how are you involving others? How are you extending that trust to a broader circle than you might have originally? Futuristic, which I know might be a bit of a surprise, but I thought it might help people inform their motives.
Oh, yeah.
The motives inspired by seeing what could be, what
Mm-hmm.
can be out in front of us. Um, and then also significance, just because of their focus on wanting to do meaningful work. So that leads with a strong intent toward others. And then also adaptability. It's a relationship building theme, as we know, but it's also has a wonderful ability to adjust to accommodate the needs of others. So other people's intents, we've touched on the topic of purpose before. Accommodating that to figure out what the intent is. So I'm going to stop there. I
Right.
didn't know if you had any thoughts or questions on those first two. I want to cover the other parts of Stephen Covey's work, but
Yeah.
were there thoughts you had on that?
I love that we're talking about the character, that these two specific things are dealing with the character of people, because that says a lot, right? That's building your track record with both your integrity and your intent. So I love that you're bringing that in about the character. Yeah, let's move on to the
Yeah.
competence side.
So the competence side is defined by the capabilities component, which is it actually speaks right to our Clifton strengths and strengths-based development,
Absolutely.
because capabilities are talents plus skills plus knowledge, which we know is the strengths-based development
Yep.
equation to a certain
Yep.
extent. So to a certain extent, all themes apply here, right? It's
Right.
it's how you get
Absolutely.
stuff done, and how you get stuff done is going to be unique to you, whether you're a leader or a team member, individual contributor. It's just thinking about how you aim those talents. And you and I do a lot of coaching on that when we talk to leaders. The
Mhm.
second part is the results part, and that's really building our track record. So people are more likely to
Yeah,
trust if you've already built a track record with them.
yeah,
Here, I think the themes of responsibility, again, really stick out. Surprise, surprise.
yeah.
You get a thoughtful talent show, you're going to get people with high responsibility. That's Jen and I. I think the other
Right.
thing that can help, the other themes that can help with that track record are analytical, because if you're building data around the things that you've gotten done, you have that data to show others. You build trust and credibility through the results piece. And then the last
Yeah,
one, and I think you'll like this with your high achiever.
yeah.
Achiever is another one. If you can show a completed checklist to people,
Oh, yes.
that it kind of goes with that responsibility piece of, hey,
Yeah,
look, these are all the things I promised I would do for the team, and look, I've achieved them all. So I think that
right.
that's another theme that really helps. Now, this is not to stay away from any of the other themes, or that the other
Right.
themes can't do this. We're offering some examples of here's how some of the themes might be able to show results.
Yeah,
There are going to be other themes that are also going to have the opportunity to build through results or through that capabilities component too. So I just
yeah.
put that little caveat out there that I'm not trying to limit the scope here. It's just to get people
Right.
thinking about, here's some examples.
Yeah, I had
Um,
some kind of similar thoughts around that too, Chad. I was going more from the strengths-based leadership book that I know you read as well. And it's
yeah,
really about those, helping managers meet the needs of followers. And obviously
yeah,
the number one, the big one that we're talking about today, building trust. And we know that relationship building themes naturally do this. But it doesn't mean that you have to have relationship building themes
right,
in order to build trust with others. So, I was looking at like some of the easy ones, like you've already touched on responsibility, we're dependable, we're trustworthy.
yeah,
Maybe even command, like we heard in our last episode. We heard really strongly from those with command that they have your back, that they're willing to fight for you and they're not going to back down. So like what a wonderful way to build trust with others using that, that strong command that you wouldn't necessarily think that builds trust, but that's a way they can do that. Analytical, you talked about that too, having the data to back it up, that builds trust, knowing that your ideas aren't just harebrained and off on one track, off on another tangent. But there might be some not so obvious ones. So I grabbed a few from each of the other three domains. A ranger, with their ability to
okay,
easily recognize talents in others, they could build trust by understanding how we work best and getting us in the right
mm,
seats, doing the right things. I liked competition too, was another one I brought from the
yes,
influencing domain, because competition learns more from their wins than from their losses. So they can build a trust with the team by showing them how the wins happen, really providing them feedback to make the team even better, being that catalyst for action. And then in our strategic thinking domain, I picked intellection because we heard about from our friends with intellection strong last season about how they like to have these deep conversations about the possibilities. So this is a way that they can
uh,
build deep relationships with others when they're able to pose a question and then get the feedback from others, so they're not just giving answers. So
that
those are some of the.
I have to say, I'm really intrigued by those last two editions, the
Oh,
competition, because I would have not thought, but the way I would have not thought about that theme in relation to trust, because oftentimes competition is
winning,
in it
right?
in
Winning
its
for
super
themselves. Mm-hmm.
right, or if it's in overdrive, they'll pretty much do anything to win, right? If you
Right.
take it to the extreme, it's I'll break the rules, I'll change the
Yeah.
goalposts. So the way in which you highlighted it, I think was fantastic of
Thanks.
allowing people to understand how the wins happen. I think is a great way to to build trust. I
Well, and
also
it's
loved
such a very strong talent too, that when you bring people along with you on that win, the win can be so much bigger. Like for the
yes,
person with competition, it can feel so much bigger when you bring others along. So yeah,
yeah.
thanks, John.
And your thoughts around intellection, I think, tie right back into what we were saying about the intent part. That
Hmm.
the intellection is allowing the not just that person, that leader, to think about the path forward, but it brings in everybody else's intent.
Yeah.
What is our shared um intent? And
Hmm.
so posing the questions and offering the opportunity for clarity around intent um is, I think it's just brilliant the way you highlighted that.
Oh,
So
thanks.
yeah, those of you with the election out there, I hope you take this to heart. Know that there's another way you can build trust just through your amazing
Yeah.
thinking powers. Um,
Yeah.
I, there's
Absolutely.
one other thing I just want to mention
Yeah.
around trust and the importance of it. And this has, I know we've done a little bit of the strength side, but I wanted to just swerve a little bit back into kind of our takes on it. One of the other things I just want to mention was trust and being able to build it through some of these talent themes really provides, especially if you're a leader, it provides the leeway when leaders end up
Yeah.
making mistakes. If you've built that track record that we're talking about, if you've clarified the intent, if you're doing your best to stand in your integrity space,
Yeah.
then and then being vulnerable about, hey, I goofed, or you know, I didn't
Hmm.
do exactly what I meant to do. If you've already built that track record, then the trust allows you the leeway to be even more vulnerable. Um,
Yeah.
and the other thing that really stuck out to me, I came across a Gallup article in preparation for this, and it had this great quote. And I'm going to just look at my notes to make sure I get this right. So,
Yeah.
trusting networks are necessary for organizations to succeed. A leader's success
Mm.
depends on their reputation extending beyond their closest confidants.
Mm.
So if you build trusting relationships with those closest to you and that they know they can trust you, then they're more willing to extend essentially your trust through them to others
Yeah.
and vice versa. Um,
Yeah.
Especially in
That's
this day and
great.
age when, especially the upper level leaders are not necessarily with the frontline leaders on a day-to-day
Mhm.
basis. There needs to be a bridge of trust that flows through, your middle managers, your frontline managers, right down to individual contributors, and building trust through some of the ways we've highlighted through strengths is extremely important to make sure organization succeeds. So it
Yeah.
just goes back to kind of like, why are we talking about this and why is it
Right.
the number one need? And
It
just
comes
thinking
down
about,
to just a human need, in any
yeah.
relationship. We cannot live alone. We cannot withstand things on our own. We need each other. So knowing that this is the number one component, I mean, it extends far beyond the workplace. Yeah.
um Jen, as you think about some of the things we've talked about so far, and
Yeah.
we've talked about the strengths and so forth, I'm curious, as we have some leaders hopefully listening to this, what do you think leaders should be doing different?
Yeah.
What's not working now? I mean, we heard the stats at the beginning, like there's very little trust in the workplace right now.
Yeah.
Engagement is low and tied to trust.
Mhm.
How do we rectify the situation?
Yeah, I'm gonna go right to generational stuff again, like we touched on a little bit last time too, because I think this is really key. So right now, millennials and Gen Z are like most of the individual contributors right now in the workplace. So I could give you stats, but I'm not going to. That's Chad's things. They are the lowest as far as when they're scored and their satisfaction at work, they score the lowest. They have the
Okay.
lowest engagement scores. And these are tied to kind of two main things: that they don't know how their work aligns with the purpose or mission of the company, and they don't know what's expected of them at work. So we talked a lot about that one last week when we talked about the expectations. So why I think this is so important to this specific conversation is this younger generation, they're used to getting the immediate responses, right? So between life experiences like 9/11, there's things to be afraid of. Now there's all kinds of things that slow us down in air traffic, flying anywhere. The financial crisis, we saw lots of people go through that, and some of this generation And Z and the millennials were children watching their parents lose housing, and during the financial crisis, the growing cost of school debt. So all of these students are in that like bubble of just having so much school debt. And they have reason to be cautious. They have reason to not trust because of the things that they've experienced in their life. That lack of trust, it leads right to that lack of trust that Chad mentioned in the stats with the lack of trust in leadership. It's like a trickle down effect to it. So why this is so important, Chad, is that these two, the millennials and the Generation Z, reported that less than 25%, I do have a stat for that one, it came from Gallup, less than 25% of them are saying they're receiving meaningful feedback. Like, not every week, this is receiving meaningful feedback at all. Less than 25%, 1 in 4, or less than 1 in 4. This is important because this is the group of people by the year 2035 that are going to be our managers and our leaders. How are they learning to lead when no one's talking to them about the mission and purpose and how they align with it? No one's talking to them about what they do well and what they should continue doing. How are they learning to lead others if they're not receiving that instant feedback that they so desperately need? I think that's why this is so important right now.
Yeah. And building the trust around that so that they can trust the feedback that they are receiving.
Yes.
So yeah, I definitely would agree with you that it's important. I think you highlighted some great reasons why trust is so important and why leaders need to change the cadence of their feedback.
Yes.
But also their willingness to extend the trust of, hey, that positive intent you mentioned before, right? That I know you want to be here to do good work. I want to help you to do that and extend the trust that they want to do good work.
Right.
They're cautious to do so because they've seen what their parents, good work got them. So
right.
I hope leaders will take that to heart, that you need to extend yourself, trust the people you've got, but then also be willing to engage them with that feedback that I think you so brilliantly pointed out.
Yeah, and not just every once in a while, not once a quarter. This is often. This is weekly. This is even daily. Reaching out and communicating with one another on just a normal person type level, maybe daily. As simple as just checking in. How are you doing? How are things going? How can I help you? The leaders really need to be, if the younger generations aren't asking the questions, the leaders need to be there asking the questions, leading the conversation, being there for the younger generation so they are receiving feedback. There's so much more stats on feedback, but I know we're going to get to that one in another episode.
I was going to say the same thing. For our listeners, we know we're coming back around to feedback and meaningful conversations and defining those for you. I want to build on your comments because I think that there's another component. You mentioned I'm the sort of the numbers guy. I think one of the things that leaders really need to do differently is actually go assess themselves. Even it's as simple as putting a question out, whether it's in an email or you do an anonymous Google form of some sort. But survey your team with the question, I trust my leader. And then have a strongly agree to strongly disagree. And do that on a periodic basis. Maybe not every week, but maybe you're doing it every quarter or every month or something. And start to track, hey, do your people actually trust you? Is it just are you getting a facade of trust, or do you have the trust of your people? So I think that's one thing. Assess where you are and then act accordingly. If you need to build some trust back in, you're getting some of those neutrals or disagrees, or maybe even a couple disagrees, like people fall into that category of not trusting their organizational leadership. You've got some work to do. So
going back to those behaviors we talked about at the very beginning, those like obvious behaviors that you can spot. If somebody's already CYA, or looking for mistakes in others, it sounds like there's a low level of trust there. How can you help build that back up? I love that, Chad. I love that.
And then I think the second part is, and we've alluded to this as a couple different points during this episode, is Jen and I as coaches run an exercise where we talk about the 4 needs of followers. Trust is one of them. We'll get to some of the others later in the season. But take the time as a leader, think about, okay, what actions are you taking on right now to build trust? And then tying your strengths to that. Think about which talent themes, which strengths are really allowing you to build trust through those actions. Because our talents are just the way we behave, think, and feel. How can you then aim that to actually come down with actual actions that build trust? And that's an exercise that Jen and I can help people through. Again, this isn't a sales pitch for our coaching, but it is an exercise that's really important when we talk about leadership development. Thinking about how you are utilizing your most innate abilities, your most innate talents to build those levels of trust across character and competency, and within that, the integrity, the intent, the capabilities, all that. You really need to look at that. And then the third point that I'll just mention, and it's been a highlight of this whole episode, is you've got to extend the trust before you see it from others and lead with that positive intent. I think there are a lot of leaders out there that are cautious around, whether it's a new employee or somebody that they've maybe inherited onto their team. You're like, well, I just don't know about this person. Be willing and be vulnerable enough. There again, there's that vulnerability word. Be vulnerable enough to extend the trust first. And then when it starts to lag or not disintegrate, but start to wash away, how can you then repair that?
Yeah.
But don't focus on the repairing first. Don't focus on, we're going to build the trust little by little. You're going to spend so much time doing that and not be able to help your team move forward.
Yeah.
So
that's so great.
Yeah. So those would be my sort of last thoughts on this, and just helping leaders be better and reverse some of these stats that we were talking about at the beginning, about not trusting and yeah. So, were there any other thoughts? I know you and I have touched on this topic a couple different times across previous podcasts and our one-on-one conversations, but anything else you want to share with the audience? I kind of took that last bit.
Yeah, you're good. I think the one thing I want to say is this boils down to being authentically who you are. So, like if we are communicating often, if our communication is clear, and we can build that trust quicker and easier when we are authentically who we are instead of pretending to be something that we're not. So I don't like that whole fake it till you make it thing. I don't know that builds trust or gets followers necessarily. But I know what does: vulnerability and authenticity. So those are the two things I think that all of us need to constantly be thinking about. Am I being authentic to who I am? Am I being open and vulnerable to the person that I'm working with, so that I know they know where I'm coming from and our communication can be open and not have any barriers in our way?
That's fantastic. No, that I would say that's a great note to end on. You've really highlighted the vulnerability, be authentic, think about your strengths, all awesome notes to end on.
Thanks,
so
Jen.
We hope the leaders out there that you've listened to this and have some new ideas about how to change your leadership. As you do so, I'm going to keep encouraging you to keep playing to your strengths. And Jen?
And I'm going to encourage you to be uniquely you.
We'll see you on the next episode. If you like this episode, we encourage you to like, follow, and subscribe to wherever you find your podcasts.